My name is Dean Trevis. I'm an ex-Marine, now working for the police, operating in danger areas. One day, I was transferred to our new world president's prestigious capital, Alpha City. They sent for people like me for dangerous missions. And yet, this city didn't have a reputation for being a troubled area. That day, they just asked me to overpower a gang of terrorists that had besieged the city hospital, plunging the whole area into a state of terror. Any police squad could have dealt with it easily. It was a bit fishy. But instead, my boss had canceled my holidays to send me there. That really put me in a bad...
I apologize, but the cutscene just kind of, cuts off right there. But anyway, this is a beat-em-up, a 3D beat-em-up. One of the earlier ones. Not the earliest by any margin, but definitely one of the earlier. It's been almost entirely lost to the sands of time. Nobody knows about it, and the people who do know about it think it's pretty awful. And I'm not going to disagree with them, but I think there was promise here. It kind of reminds me of a much lower budget, much less polished Oni, and I really liked Oni. Anyway, for this first level, we have a limited amount of time to get to 4 bombs and disarm them. If we disarm them very quickly, we get a time bonus, but the time bonus isn't necessary. We have an arrow at the bottom of the screen that points us to each of the bombs, but sometimes the arrow freaks out, so I wouldn't rely on it too heavily. We simply disarm them by pressing the punch button when we're near them. We picked up a gun from an enemy, and guns are by far the best thing in the game. Conserving your health is the #1 priority, and if you have a gun, the enemies can't get anywhere near you, so it's ideal. All of the levels are fairly large, and they're not corridor after corridor. They're often made so that you have to go and find various objectives. There's not really a single level where you don't have to search for something. This isn't too bad though, because this game's idea of mazes is, well, it's very simplistic. And the time limit for every level is incredibly lenient. I'm not sure that it's possible to run out of time unless you spend the whole time just digging around. And even then, more enemies will spawn, so you'll probably die before the time runs out. We're almost out of ammo for our gun. All of the guns have ammo, even your standard pistol, which you have on you at all times. Sometimes enemies drop ammo pickups, but more often they'll just drop new guns, which is much more convenient for you. All of the item drops in this game are completely random, which means you're at the mercy of RNG. So you better get good at the hand-to-hand combat, because the game can completely fuck you over by just not spawning anything useful. Thankfully, there's a save point at each level, so you only have to go like 5 minutes at a time without fucking up. I'm sure it's possible to beat this entire game without even getting hit, but the camera makes that kind of difficult. You only have a 3-hit combo at your disposal, and you have punches and kicks. You can mix the two together, but kicks tend to affect a wider area of enemies and knock them down a lot easier, so I recommend sticking with kicks most of the time. If you see a red fist at the bottom of the screen, that means you can't move forward until you defeat enough enemies, and then the arrow will reappear, or sometimes the fist just disappears if there isn't an arrow. I'm a little bit upset that I managed to make this first level look so easy, because I guarantee you that any normal person playing this game would have died by now. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, I cannot freely rotate the camera. All the camera angles are fixed. Now, I normally don't have any problems with games with fixed camera angles, because usually they're chosen so that way you can see everything you need to. But there are so many tight corners in this game, and so many tiny corridors, and the levels are so big. It kind of feels like I'm playing a beat-em-up made in a Resident Evil engine, except the camera switches a lot more frequently. We picked up a shotgun from one of those enemies, which is a one-hit kill on most of the human characters. It does take a couple seconds for him to actually fire the thing, so you want to make sure you're a good distance away. However, the gun itself does not have any range problems. It can fire as far as you can see. And here you're about to see a completely reproducible glitch that happens every time I finish this level. No clue why. In this stage, it can be genuinely difficult to tell what the hell you're supposed to be doing. First of all, there are enemies right at the start with knives, and they throw them at your face. You can block the knives simply by holding down the R1 button, and you can perform a grab while you're blocking, and doing a grab attack is a one-hit kill on most human enemies. If the sound seems to be out of sync, that's because this game in particular hates my game capture. No other game does, just this one. I tried my best to resync it, but hey, nobody's perfect. So, the objective of this stage, even though it doesn't tell you this in any fashion, is just to wait until enough enemies spawn. That's it. After a certain wave of enemies spawns, then the door out of the subway will open and you can leave for no reason. The arrow leads you to specific locations, but there's nothing at those locations. Yeah, see, there's nothing in that stairway. We just have to wait until the next enemy spawn. And since the corridors in this stage are so tiny, I recommend using your pistol whenever possible, since trying to engage in close quarters combat in tight spaces tends to be a disaster. Close quarters combat is never the preferred option, but especially here, you need room to maneuver. Oh, we can proceed to the elevator now for some reason. It doesn't tell us why, but now we can proceed to the elevator and leave. Well, we could if the red fist weren't there, which means we need to destroy a certain number of enemies before we can proceed. There we go. Sometimes it's random which enemies we need to destroy. I don't know why. There are many things about this game I don't understand. And I can guarantee you I'm the only living person who knows this much about the game in the first place. I'm sure I know more about this game than the programmers at this point. So it said we need to defeat the terrorists and get the keycard to the hospital. So you would assume that the terrorist group right outside of the subway would hold the keycard. But that would be incorrect. The keycard, like most of the items, seems to randomly spawn based on an algorithm. So if the first group of enemies isn't holding the keycard, the game helpfully tells us to go back in the subway, so it can spawn more. For some reason, the game won't spawn more enemies unless you go in and back out the subway. And I really wish I were joking or making that up, but no, the arrow even points you back to the subway, so that way you know to go in there if you want more enemies to spawn. This game couldn't have been a cash grab because who asked for this, right? They had to want to make this game. So I want to give it the benefit of the doubt and say they just had no idea what they were doing. Oh yes, before I forget, the game is co-op and it's much easier in co-op, but for some reason the female character seems to attack a lot slower, so if you get stuck with her, I'm sorry about that. Still no keycard yet. Still no keycard. Do you see how a normal person might have issue understanding what the fuck is going on right now? Like, the only reason I even saw this game through to the end is because I have an obsession with beat-em-ups. I'm sure this man has the keycard. Unfortunately, he ran down into the subway to attack us, which means, well, we don't have much room to move. Got it, let's get out of here. Oh wait, we can't get out of here because of that red fist, which means that we need to destroy a certain number of enemies before progressing. If I could at least get out of the subway, though, that would make me... yeah, thank you. Fighting enemies in the subway is the worst. It's not a good idea. You need to be able to move around everybody. Like in most beat-em-ups, really. Except for this one is a lot less, So it's back to bomb defusing again with this level, but this time we don't know where the bombs are, so we don't have that helpful arrow. I want to show off that we can pick up objects and throw them, but I need to put my pistol away first. Now, picking up and throwing objects is almost entirely useless because you have to get way too close to do so. But that's okay, because while we were dicking around trying to pick up that trash can, the enemies were already hitting themselves for no reason. As you can see here, our kick is the ultimate form of crowd control. It's the best way to get enemies on the floor, so that way we don't have to worry about them punching us in the back. And the enemies were nice enough to drop 2 shotguns for us. It's very friendly of them. So there are 2 bombs on the bottom floor, and there are 2 bombs on the top floor. You don't have to enter any of the rooms on the bottom floor to find the bombs. They're just out here in the lobby, so avoid the rooms entirely unless you really feel like fighting a bunch of extra enemies, which I'm going to assume you don't, since the idea is to conserve your health. 10 minutes is way too long a time limit for this level, and if you didn't care about how much damage you took, you could probably finish it in under a minute, assuming you could work with the camera. You really only want to grab enemies when they're decently separated from the others because you can still get hit while you're initiating a grab, especially with enemies that throw knives. Now we have a shield around us that deflects bullets. If you look under our health bar, you see that green thing? That's our shield, and it deflects bullets for us. But knives, for some reason, don't count. So enemies can and will unload an entire clip of a gun into you, but if they throw a knife at your head, that's going to hit 100% of the time unless you're blocking. Eventually, if enough enemies are shooting at us at the same time, our shield will go down and the bullets will actually start to hurt us, but that probably isn't going to happen. Our shield is very, very sturdy. It's so durable that there's a boss whose entire gimmick is just shooting enough bullets to actually lower our shield. So you don't need to worry about the enemy's guns at all, is what I'm saying. All you need to worry about is getting hit in the face with a knife. So if you get the opportunity to engage in long-range conflict, I recommend taking it, because usually enemies don't throw knives, they usually have guns. And after this first world, I guess, with the terrorists, there won't be any more knife-throwing enemies. But until then, they're a huge pain in the ass. But they do teach you how to block, which is essential. The elevators opened up so we can theoretically leave at any time, but you might have noticed the red fist, which meant that we couldn't leave yet. Now we can. Nope. Okay, now we can. This level is the last one before our very first boss. Are you excited? I'm excited. So this level is another maze-like level, what a surprise, and this one we need to find keycards to open the variety of doors that we have lying around. Until now there was only one keycard that opened one door at the end or beginning of a level. In this one there are multiple keycards, and here is a useless keycard that we don't want. It opens the door to a gag. It's not even a funny gag. Normally I would show it off if this was any other game, but we really can't take the risk of fighting extra enemies because our health drains very fast whenever we get hit. Down this right hallway and into the room on the right is the first keycard we actually need. It goes to the storage room, which is back at the very beginning of the level, where we entered at. It's in the room across from the one that's already open. And unfortunately we can't just run back there past the enemies because, again, the red fist prevents such. I feel like the red fist would be unnecessary if they just made the enemies strong enough that you couldn't run past them with no issue. But make no mistake, if the red fist weren't there, you could just run past every enemy in every level, except for the bosses, and you wouldn't have a problem. But if you could just run past everyone, then the entire game would lose its challenge factor, and really the only reason to play this game is because it's so challenging. That's not to say the combat it can't be satisfying, because the sound effects are pretty good, but you only have a 3-hit combo, and it's as simplistic as beat-em-up combat can get. Anytime you see me running into a wall, that's because the controls reset every time the camera switches perspective, which happens a lot. And I've played so many games that don't do that it's very hard for me to adjust. So every time the camera angle switches, you have to let go of the control stick and then put your thumb back on it, otherwise you'll be running in the wrong direction. This wouldn't be an issue if the game had tank controls, where up is always forward, but it has, full 3-dimensional movement. Man, that's a weird thought. This game might actually be easier if it had tank controls in it. The only other game I can think of that resets the controls every time the fixed camera switches is Scooby-Doo for the Nintendo 64. And I didn't have a very fun time playing that. After we get the last keycard out of the intensive care unit, we can finally leave this place, and the intensive care unit is easy to miss. It's this door right here. And if you're just walking through the hallways as fast as possible, you might miss it. This is because the amount of times the camera switches angles depends heavily on how fast you're moving, and it's possible to move too fast for the camera angle to show you the door. If I were taking over this building, I might put the keycards in harder to find places than this, because they were just kind of lying on the floor. Also, this place doesn't look very much like a hospital aside from the very white everything. I suppose they got that down. So this level is a little bit dark, just an itty bitty bit too dark for me to see what's happening. So we're gonna head into a different room, if you can even tell what's happening. It was this dark on my TV, and the only reason I even know I'm going the general direction I'm supposed to is because I played this thing so many times. So the huge time limit in this level, I presume, is because our first boss battle is in here, though it's not very difficult. It might be if you try to approach it head-on, like most people probably would in this situation. After we eventually find our way to a much better lit garage, right here. This is the boss room. The boss doesn't look that different from a normal terrorist. He's that Robin Eye fellow that we're shooting at right now. Guns don't do very much damage to him. The only gun that does noteworthy damage is the shotgun. The idea with Robin here is that he is very, very good at hand-to-hand combat. So what we need to do is run around him in a circle and shoot him with a shotgun. Now, provided you don't have a shotgun handy, we just need to run around to his back and kick him in the back, then run away and kick him in the back again. This boss fight would be painfully easy if it weren't for two things. One, there's a ton of goons swarming at you at any given time, and two, the camera makes it very hard to move around in a circle consistently. That being said, as long as you stay out of arm's length of all the terrorists until you're ready to attack, you should be okay. Because again, their bullets do nothing to you. Robin, please stop making those weird noises. You're making me very uncomfortable, sir.
The evening began more brutally than I'd expected. Once I had come to this terrorist who had saved me from that weird creature, he started telling me what was really happening. His story seemed absolutely ridiculous. His name was Jim, and he was part of a resistance group fighting against an invasion of alien beings who had taken control of the country and were transforming humans. So most of the resistance fighters' opponents were actually aliens, afraid of being exposed. Unfortunately, some innocent people got involved too, like I did. Then Jim suggested I join him in the fight. I found his story very hard to believe, but I wanted to know more, so I agreed. Anyway, I didn't really have a choice. I could either act as a puppet for these crustaceans from outer space, or keep fighting this man who had saved my life.